What quarterback should you be drafting in your fantasy football drafts this year? Should you wait? Should you maybe take one early? We're going to be discussing all that on today's show. I got my boy Justin here. He was here last time. We're going to talk through this again, kind of give you two different perspectives because I like to draft quarterbacks early. I know Justin's not a big fan, so you can see both the perspectives. And maybe if we are going with one early, who we going with? One later, who we going with? So let's just kick off the show with talking about early quarterbacks. Now, I know you're not a big fan, but if you, we'll just start off with why. And if you had to take one early, who would one be that you would take in what round?
I think it just comes down to the year, right? Like different years in fantasy, you can address the quarterback position at different times, and it's all about value to me. And I think this year, especially because of what we saw last season with the injuries to the quarterback, like last year was kind of an anomaly with the quarterback scenario. We saw a lot of quarterbacks that didn't finish the season or missed good portions of the season. But when I look at the quarterback classes here, it's like the game has become so much easier for quarterbacks. Like typically, you would think they stay healthier longer, but they're also putting up way more points than they ever have. So I think the difference in the top quarterback versus like what we've seen in the previous years where we found some value in mid rounds or late rounds, that's what kind of steers me away from taking a quarterback really early. It's just I feel like I'd rather address some other positions and find studs there instead of the quarterback position, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. For me, how I approach the position is just like if I'm going one early, then it has to be a guy who can be quarterback one. Because if you can get the guy who's quarterback one in the season, has the most points. I mean, last year we're looking at Josh Allen who put up a lot of people like Jared Goff. I mean, I don't want Jared Goff just because Jared Goff, like he's fine, but last year was like 17 fantasy points per game, but he was quarterback 7 on the season, right? But the biggest problem was that Jared Goff Josh Allen outscored Jared Goff by over 100 fantasy points. So, like, you're just leaving so many fantasy points on the board for a guy who's going to put up the most fantasy points on a week-to-week basis for you. So, if I'm going to draft one, it has to be a guy who I can look at realistically and be, okay, that guy can be quarterback one. I have a pretty good feeling that he could be quarterback one. So, the guys that if I'm going early, it's Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, or Patrick Mahomes. Those are the only 3 that I wanna go early, and why Patrick Mahomes? Bit of a down year last year. It was his worst. I mean, he still won the Super Bowl. I think he was Super Bowl MVP as well. So, like, even though it was a down year for Patrick Mahomes in terms of fantasy football, why it was down here. Travis Kelce was already hurt heading into the season. Maybe he's starting to decline a little bit, but then they also address the receiver room. They draft, Xavier Worthy gives them a big play threat on the outside. They add Marquise Brown, who I think he's more of a wide receiver too, but he's a good wide receiver too, in my opinion, and he probably fits in that scheme really well. And then you also have Rashee Rice. So I just think Patrick Mahomes is going to rebound in a big way. And we've seen it out of those 2 guys, out of those 3 guys, that they can average 25 fantasy points for a full season. So if I'm going one early, and I think that they go late enough, it's not the second round anymore, especially for Patrick Mahomes, who's now going in the 4th round. It's late enough where there's some good guys in that range, but also it's just if you get that number 1 quarterback, like he can carry you throughout the season.
Yeah, a strong quarterback can carry you throughout the season. And the better part is when you can find even more value on that, right? Like Mahomes, you're going to pay a little bit of name tax for, obviously, right? It's Mahomes. And coming off a year where he was a QB 11, it's just like, or QB 8, I'm going to say, I'm sorry, I probably butchered that up. But Mahomes, it's the floor, the ceiling is there with this year's receivers, right? Like the upside is there with the speed, as you mentioned. But I start to go and I'm like, all right, well, if Mahomes had a year like CJ Stroud, would that surprise me? Probably not. If he had a year like Dak, would that surprise me? Probably not. So you talk about the upside of being able to finish QB1. I think Anthony Richardson fits that mold. I think, like you talked about, Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Mahomes could fit that mold. If we're being honest, I don't think he gets there, but CJ Stroud could be in that role. Jayden Daniels is another player that's like in the mid rounds that could be in that tier. So we're talking about over 20 fantasy points, or if you want to get to up to 25, that's fine as well. But there's guys that can fit that mold. Kyler Murray is just chilling back there. And it's like, there's guys that, in my opinion, that could be a 20 to 25 point. Maybe they don't finish the season, or maybe they miss a couple and they don't finish as a top 3 guy. But I feel very confident in that there's 5 to 7 quarterbacks that could be in that same wheelhouse. So for me, I'm taking my chances a little bit later on versus those positional players in that third, fourth round. You're coming down to the seventh, eighth round. That's where there's a big talent gap between starters and then fringe players.
No, I agree. There are some guys though I really do like in that range in the
Yeah.
7th round, like Najee and stuff like that. But so if you had to take one early, like which quarterback would you take?
I would
Typically
probably
in like
go.
in the 3rd round.
Yeah, if I was just going for one of the rock solid elite guys, I'm a Lamar guy, and I think that they're going to loosen him up a little bit more this year. Obviously, he lost some weight in the this offseason, but to me, he's always had the upside of like, when Lamar hits, it's a 40-point day. And I know Josh
Yeah.
Allen, Jalen Hurts have been a little bit more consistent over the time, but if Lamar plays a whole season, it's like, and if the rushing is there, that 1,000-yard rushing is there, he's a nightmare. But Anthony Richardson is the other
Mhm.
one. Anthony Richardson, to me, we saw a glimpse of it in the first 3 weeks last year, and it's like he kept
Yeah.
getting hurt, kept getting hurt, kept getting hurt. If we can get in a whole season, which I don't think that's like too far fetched. I think last year was kind of an anomaly. If he can stay healthy this
Yeah.
entire season, it's going to be crazy, Tyler.
I mean, you can say for every player in fantasy, they can always get hurt. And sure,
Yeah,
maybe he's at an elevated risk to get hurt than, other quarterbacks because he is a mobile quarterback. But like, I mean, we've seen it with Lamar where really last year was his first year healthy in, a couple of years. And, he was very good. I think he was quarterback 3 on the season. So no, Anthony Richardson, we talked about this at one point. There's only 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion, that can have 10 plus rushing touchdowns. We've already seen Josh. We've already seen Jalen. Jalen's done it for the past 3 years, which is ridiculous.
yeah,
But in each of the past 3 years. But then the other guy I would say is Anthony Richardson. He hasn't done it yet, but showed us in that very small sample size last year. I think it was 4 rushing touchdowns in basically 3 games because that 2 of the games he got hurt in the last game, and then he's out for season. So very small sample size, but I mean, it's just there. So I agree. I do like, and Anthony Richardson goes the latest out of the 3. And well, a lot of the times I do like A Rich a lot too, because at least over on Sleeper, in the 5th round, it kind of the players drop off just a little bit. Like once you get to like, in my opinion, Kenneth Walker, Amari Cooper, like
yeah.
players like that, they kind of then they're off the board, and then it goes like uh Aaron
Like lower
Jones and
ceiling
like,
players, right?
yeah, like just guys that I don't love. And it's kind of like in the 6th round too. So I really do like Anthony Richardson where it goes. Problem though, the problem is that I really do think he's going to go higher and higher. I think as the season progresses here, the preseason, I think the hype's going to really build. I've already been seeing him go in the 4th round a lot over CJ Stroud, who CJ Stroud's coming down, which I think he needs to. But
Yeah.
I've been seeing Anthony Richardson just push up and push up even more, and I really do think that he's going to push up into that 4th round by
What's
the
wrong
end
with
of
that
draft
though?
season.
What's wrong with that though? Because if he's Josh
There's
Allen,
nothing wrong with
you
it,
like
but
Josh Allen early, like that's
yeah.
that's the that's if he stays healthy, he is Josh Allen. Like to be
Well,
honest,
no,
like
no, 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 no.
yeah, if
No,
he
no, no,
stays
no, no,
healthy,
no.
he's Josh
He's
Allen.
Jalen Hurts. He's Jalen
Oh
Hurts,
no,
not
no, no,
Josh Allen.
he's Josh
No.
Allen. If he
Josh
has
Allen
the
is the
arm.
only okay, here's the difference with Josh Allen. Josh Allen is the only quarterback. No quarterback can do this. He's the only quarterback that can throw for 30 plus passing touchdowns, 4,000 yards, and run for 700 and have 10 plus rushing touchdowns. He's the only one. You might say Anthony Richardson could do that. I highly, highly doubt Anthony Richardson pushes for 30 plus passing touchdowns or throws for 4,000 yards. I don't think that's likely at all. I think he's going to be around Jalen Hurts, who's going to throw for probably like 3,000, maybe gets up to upper 3,000 yards and then stays in that like 25 touchdown range, passing touchdown range. So Josh Allen's different. And Josh Allen is a premium because Josh Allen's the only quarterback over the past 4 years who's averaged in each one of those years 24 fantasy points per game. That's why he's a premium, because he's the best quarterback in fantasy football. He's in a tier by
I
himself.
think you understating what Anthony Richardson was last year because in those games he was playing. I mean, he was putting up 25 fantasy points a game, 23 to 25, whatever you want to call it. Now, with the arm strength, it's different from Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts didn't have the same type
Yeah.
of arm strength that Anthony
Yeah.
Richardson has. He don't have the same frame that Anthony Richardson has. So if they do decide to use him in the red zone, he does get 10 plus touchdowns. He's also the kind of runner that's probably going to see somewhere between 800 to 1,000 yards rushing,
Yeah.
just because of the nature
Or
of who
probably,
he is.
yeah.
So if we're talking 3,500 to 4,000 yards with 25 passing touchdowns with 10 rushing, like it's all the makings of the same type of player. So I think that the potential is there with Anthony Richardson. Like you mentioned, the closer you get to draft day, unfortunately, we're going to be paying the ceiling price,
Yeah.
but the ceiling could be like the
Quarterback
QB1,
one. I mean, it could be quarterback one.
you know?
Absolutely. So one guy though, like, I mean, you drafting CJ Stroud where he's currently going?
Nah, I'm staying away. I'm
No.
staying away. You know, and
But
you know, it's not for the reason everybody thinks, right? Like everybody thinks, oh, it's there's no reason you should be fading CJ Stroud. He was this good last year, and the weapons only got better. You add Mixon, you add Stephon Diggs, but when I look at this team, like you have to think, I think that's one of the things that fantasy managers struggle with. They struggle with the fantasy aspect of it versus the real life
real life.
applications.
Yeah.
And when you have an offense that plays that well, when you have the defensive additions that this Houston Texans team did, this is a better football team than it was. They're not
Mhm.
also going to catch people off guard like they did last year. So I actually see a little bit of regression in fantasy wise from this offense because they're going to be more efficient. They're not going to
Mhm.
have to throw. CJ's not going to have to throw the ball 45 times a game this to win football games this year. They're going to have a running back that's stable now with Joe Mixon. And even if you want to call Damian Pierce, he's a solid backup, right? Now you
Yeah.
got the receiving core. They can move the ball effectively downfield. I don't think CJ's going to have to push it as much downfield and get into shootouts. So while I
They could
think
blow
that
teams out, and they
yeah, and they really could. They could be
Mhm.
averaging, 25 a game, and it doesn't have to be, or damn near 30 a game, and it doesn't have to be all through the air. So I don't know. I think that it's going to be a good offense, and I like CJ Stroud as a player, but it wouldn't surprise me to see those numbers be very eerily similar to what they were this year, just at a more efficient pace.
And who's they have the Titans, Jags, and who's the other team in the
Indy,
division? Indy, okay, so really, I mean, those are 3 pretty competitive. Titans should be they could be decent, they're just
yeah.
definitely the worst team out of that division. No, and, like, I just say this, there's just no rushing upside, and, like, if I'm gonna take a quarterback in that range, he has to have rushing upside or, like, he has to be Patrick Mahomes, like, that's
Yeah.
what CJ Stroud has to be, and could it happen? Yeah, but, like, it's just I'm not I'd much rather take the chance on Anthony Richardson in that range than CJ or a guy that you talked about earlier, like, I'd rather just take Kyler Murray, who's done it, and now has, some really good weapons, and he can definitely get there, so I agree with you on CJ Stroud, but once again, like, in best ball, early in best ball, like May, he was going in like the 4th round, 5th round. Now he's starting to fall into like the 7th round. So I think people are kind of smarting up to it and he's going to fall a little bit, but I still think he's going to be just a tad bit expensive.
It's a
Uh,
tier to me, right? I think the tier, and you mentioned how you had your guys, it was Josh Allen, Lamar, Jalen Hurts, and Mahomes. I
mhm.
kind of have a similar tier, but instead of Mahomes, I have Anthony Richardson there, and it's purely for the rushing upside
Yeah.
and the touchdown upside, right?
Mhm.
My next tier is very similar quarterbacks. It's Mahomes, CJ, Dak, and then Kyler, right? But Kyler for different reasons because the offensive weapons really aren't there. Otherwise, I might have him ahead of all 3 of those guys.
Could be in that first tier.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of my like if I had a first tier, second tier when it came to quarterbacks, and if you took like take the guy you want, I never have a problem with like take the guy you want in that range.
Yeah.
But to me, those are the tiers of like these guys can be QB1s, the
QB1. Yeah.
QB1, and these guys have a good chance of being there, but more than likely they're going to be there in the mid tier.
Mhm. No, I agree. I have Kyler ranked over CJ this year. I really like
I ain't
Kyler a
mad at
lot.
it.
All right, so your strategy then, you don't find yourself taking these elite guys then at cost, unless is it Anthony Richardson sometimes you might take, or are you just not really taking any
Yeah,
risk?
so Anthony Richardson is like, depending on how I feel like I drafted, if I got a lot more maybe secure pieces early on, I'm safety pieces, like just kind of floor players, then maybe I take A Rich for some upside, or if he happens to fall to me in like the 5th, 6th round, like depending on the league size, obviously, probably more 6th round. If for whatever reason the draft I'm in is
Yeah.
waiting on quarterbacks, that's a player that I would reach up to take. So I think
Mhm.
as long as I have probably a good starting 4 or 5 players that I like positional wise, then I'm looking at all right, how can I use Anthony Richardson to elevate the level of my ceiling?
So, and then you talked about a couple guys, Kyler and that stuff. So, is that who you go if you miss out on A Rich, or are you kinda going Kyler, or is there somebody else that you find yourself taking more times than not?
To be honest, I kind of find myself even going further down, right? Especially in single QB leagues. Now,
Mhm.
Superflex, obviously, I may not wait as long. It depends on how the draft is going, right? Every draft is different to me.
Yeah.
But I kind of find myself waiting, especially in 12 team leagues, until the last 10 to 12 range, where we're talking like a Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, maybe even a Jayden Daniels. Like those to me, like Jordan Love and Brock Purdy are the Kirk Cousins and Jared Goffs of this draft. It's
Yeah.
you're going to get probably QB1 production, and they're going to be fringe QB1s going in your draft. There's just not a whole lot of upside for them to finish at the top. So a lot of
Mhm.
people are probably going to wait to take those guys. And then Jayden Daniels is just a wild card.
Yeah.
It's like if he hits, we could be talking about Lamar 2.0. And
Yeah.
if he doesn't, if he struggles, I think he's probably a high end QB2 at worst. So I kind of like taking Brock Purdy in that range, not just because I'm a Niner fan, but because that's probably one of the safest floors in all of
Yeah.
fantasy when it comes to like back end QB1s.
No, I agree with that. Where he's currently going a lot of times is honestly like 10th roundish. In uh, how I approach it this year is I do like one of the elite guys if I can land them. Now, the 3rd round is, in my opinion, loaded with talent. I think the 3rd round is just a great round in fantasy football. There's so many good wide receivers there. There's honestly some pretty good running backs in that range as well. And even into the 4th round, there's still a lot of guys that I really like on the board.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. And for me, if I do end up waiting on the quarterback position, there's 3 guys I really like to go. And one of them you talked about, Jayden Daniels, because I really do think like rushing upside, unless your league is different and it kind of favors more pocket passers, throwing yards and passing touchdowns and that kind of stuff. Maybe he's not as good in those type of leagues because there are some that try to adjust for it. But in your regular leagues, like one quarterback league, just standard scoring kind of stuff, he I really do think that Jayden Daniels could be a guy who could push top 5. I think that
Yeah.
like rookie season, he could be Kyler Murray-esque, where Kyler, his rookie season, was quarterback 6 overall in fantasy football. So he's a guy that if I end up missing out on those elite guys, I do like Kyler, but it's also kind of like there's a lot of guys I really like to even go in that range. So I'd rather just take the chance on Jayden Daniels, who currently goes like round 11, 10, and even in your home leagues, people don't like to draft quarterbacks that much or draft rookies that much. And especially rookie quarterbacks, I feel like a lot of people kind of fade them a little bit. So Jane Daniels could be a guy in your draft that kind of just falls and falls a little bit because people don't really want to take him. They rather take Kirk Cousins because
Yeah.
he's a safe name or a Jared Goff because he's a proven name. So they just pass up on Jane Daniels. And he could be that guy that even if he doesn't hit, there will be a quarterback on the waivers that you can always pick up that does well in fantasy football. So he's just a guy that I agree with you. Why not just take the chance on dart throw? And if it doesn't work out, there's somebody else there.
Yeah, and I feel like you start getting into that other range, that mid-tier range of like the Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins. There's a lot of options that are like very startable to me. I'm not gonna
Hmm.
lie. Like, to be honest, you got a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who we were taking as like a top 10 guy last year and
Yeah.
probably will be a top 10 type fantasy quarterback this season per game. Like, I love the value you're getting with Trevor Lawrence. I think a lot of what his struggles were with last year were with injury and then also trying to appease Calvin Ridley for half the season. It's like,
Yeah.
I think when Trevor plays a little bit more free and if he can limit the turnovers a little bit, this is a guy that should be a top 10 guy, and he's a mid-tier QB2. So I
Hmm.
have him a lot higher in my rankings than most. And then, I mean, even when you start going to like the veteran options, we talk Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins, and maybe you don't like those guys or they offer limited ceiling, but it's like them, Matt Stafford, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield. There's a bunch of like just reliable options in the mid rounds. And I think, especially in super flex leagues, I'm so willing to wait to get those guys. If I can get a
Yeah.
stacked top of the lineup and not have to reach on a quarterback, to me, I'll rock with 3 of those guys and be very, very comfortable.
No, I agree. And like in one quarterback leagues, I hate taking 2 quarterbacks, but I might just do it if I'm waiting on those guys. Like my last
Yeah.
2 picks of the draft, maybe I go, although I somebody said a number. I don't remember what the exact number is. Like Jared Goff has like double digit games this year in domes. So it's a lot of dome games for him, which is really appealing. But he's one of those players like when he's on the road outside, you don't want to start him, typically does not do well. So you could, have a Matthew Stafford where if you know, weeks line up right, you could be playing Matthew Stafford at home and send Jared Goff, and you can just chase the upside on week to week and stream it a little bit. But I agree. Like, if I miss once again, if I miss out on the league guys, I typically just fade the quarterback position until like my last couple rounds of the drafts. Jayden Daniels, one of them. I love Trevor Lawrence because, like
Yeah.
you said, we were drafting Trevor Lawrence in the 5th round last year. And we see this all the time in fantasy football when we take guys a little bit too high, which he was going too high last year, in my opinion. But when they go too high and they burn us, they just get pushed down the draft board so
Yep.
far. And so for me, he's one of those players. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is bad. I think he's one of the better Well, I think this year, if everything pans out right, people will be like, yeah, he's one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL because I just think he has that skill. Hopefully he can get there. But then another guy is just Justin Herbert. Like, I think a lot of people were also just fading Justin Herbert because of a lot of people look at this team and say they're going to be very run heavy, which I do think they're going to be a bit run heavy ish, but Justin Herbert's the best player on this team. He's the best player in the offense. And he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL that I look at him and he doesn't need the greatest weapons to succeed. I still think that he'll put up very respectable fantasy numbers. He's shown us he was quarterback 2 one season. Now he had, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, different
Yeah.
offense, but he's still that guy that's just one of those best quarterbacks in the league. He can get it done. So he's a guy that, like, in the double digit rounds is, to me, is an absolute no brainer. And I love taking there and, Jayden Daniels as well, like I said. So those are my
You
3 guys.
know,
I love them.
So let me ask you this on Herbert, because early on when I was looking, you go through your process and you start, my process obviously involves a lot of looking at like previous year production and like potential output, potential ceiling. And when I look at Justin Herbert, the numbers add up to like, man, this is a good value. But when I start thinking about who he is as a quarterback, like he has had reliable options at the receiver position. He's had a reliable running back. He's had a coaching staff that's been offensive centric, right?
Mhm.
Passing centric. And he goes to a run first coach who did kind of limit Alex Smith as potential as a fantasy quarterback for us. He did kind of limit Colin Kaepernick even as a potential fantasy quarterback for us. So when I look at what the potential for Justin Herbert is, I think it's there. But then I start looking at the guys that are going around him, and it's like, your Trevor Lawrence's, your Jared Goff's, your Kirk Cousins, your Jayden Daniels, and I'm like, is he really a value? Like, that's the part I start thinking of. I'm like, are we really getting a value on Justin Herbert, or should he be in this mid tier 2 conversation? Because who are we going to put him over? Like, even if he was a value, say you thought he was a top 12 guy or had top 12 potential on a points per game basis, who are you taking him over? And to me, I'm just like, maybe Justin Herbert just is who he is. He's probably going to have a lower ceiling this year, probably doesn't have a lot of upside. And to be honest, I'm just like, if there's guys with more upside or maybe better floor, why are we going to take the chance on Justin Herbert, who we know is going to be very limited in this offense? That's where I'm at with him, and I
Yeah.
wanted to like him. Like when I early on in my process, I wanted to like Justin Herbert because I felt like he's been one of those values in fantasy football. And I feel like we're getting to a point now where maybe it's just not going to add up for this season.
So what I'll say, uh, there is obviously concerns with the true upside with him. Now, will he be a top 5 quarterback? Probably not, right? And I do like, like we said, Jayden Daniels, because I do think that there's the potential he could be that. But then once you get outside of that range, like Jared Goff, I'm sorry, he's never going to be a top 5 quarterback. Like in points per game, maybe in the season because guys
Yeah.
get hurt and you know he's able to sneak in there. But like in terms of points per game, last year, Justin Herbert was quarterbacks 8. He actually averaged more points per game last year than Patrick Mahomes. He was 1 point off from averaging more points per game than CJ Stroud. Like, and these are guys that are going in the 5th round. Now, once again, he was also at Keenan Allen, but also missed Mike Williams. He was banged up. Like his total offense was he was basically throwing the Quentin Johnson at the end of the season, and that
Yeah.
was about it. So like I understand, and I don't think he has the true upside of like quarterback 1 or top 5, but I can easily see him being a back end quarterback 1. And once again, another guy that we're taking in the 4th round of drafts last year, and now he's going in double digit rounds. And really, it wasn't even like he wasn't even that bad last year. Like
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence was worse than him, but he truly wasn't even that bad. So for me, like I understand he may not have the true upside, maybe other guys have in that range to be quarterback one, although
But
I
Tyler,
even think he does.
this is Brandon Staley gone and Kellen Moore is gone. These are two like
I
downfield
don't
type.
think they're gonna run the foot. See, this is my problem. This is where I differ from the community. I don't think this is gonna be a super run heavy team. Like, their when your best player is it's not like a team that they have to run the football because their quarterback position's not good. You have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't and they may be
Tyler,
okay, here's the other
Tyler,
thing.
do you know who his offensive coordinator is? Do
I
you know
well,
who his offensive coordinator
yeah,
is?
it's
Greg
Greg
Roman.
Roman. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know.
And we know
I
what these Greg
don't
Roman offenses look like, bro.
bro, they're not okay. When you have a guy who can put up 30 plus touchdowns, you're not going to run the ball at a 55 to 45% rate. They're still going to be league average, most likely, in terms of passing rate, passing the football, because they have Justin Herbert. And then the other thing is when you get in close, yes, you can run the football, but you also have one of the best quarterbacks at throwing touchdown passes. This dude throws touchdown passes. They're still going to like, I don't care. I think that that is one of the most overrated things in fantasy football when you look at OCs. Now, it does matter sometimes, but like it's the same reason why a lot of people this year are fading George Pickens, are fading Najee Harris, are fading the Steelers because of Arthur Smith is there. Like OCs change a little bit, differ when they based upon personnel. And when you have a guy who's not Lamar Jackson, this is not Lamar Jackson. This is a completely different quarterback and one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL. I just think that they're going to not throw the ball at one of the highest clips, but be around league average. And I think he can still get there. Like, at least, once again, back like top 10 ish. I think that he's going to be right around there and fighting for that in terms of points per game.
A little ambitious, a little ambitious. I'll say that,
It'll
but
happen. It'll
you
happen.
know,
It'll
Hey,
happen.
I noticed both of us forgot one name, one big name in here, and we haven't talked about him at all. It hasn't come. I don't think the name has came out of either of our mouths. And
Who's
that's
that?
Caleb Williams.
Oh, yeah.
A
Yeah.
guy that's up there in the top 15. Sometimes I think lately I've been seeing Jayden Daniels finally go over him, but for a while there, Caleb Williams was ranked over Jayden Daniels, and it might still be that way. You're not drafting him at all, are you? Like no, nah.
I don't no, I don't mind him just because, like, I mean, we I think he's a pretty safe prospect.
Yeah,
You never know with quarterbacks. Like even the NFL doesn't know. They'll draft guys and they're bust. But like I think he's a true difference maker, and he's just also walking to a great situation with this- one of the best wide receiver cores in the NFL. Like
yeah,
everything is there for him to succeed. And I know like the Bears have never had a 4,000-yard passer. Rookie quarterbacks. I don't know what the actual rookie touchdown record is. I want to say it's like 27 or something
yeah.
like that.
TD record isn't
It's not
it's
over
not high, yeah,
30.
it's not over 30, and
So
then the passing record is not over 40. I think it's 4,300 or 41. It's 4,300. I want to say.
yeah, but he's also another guy that's athletic. Like, do I think he's going to run for 700 rushing yards? No, but do I think he could be Patrick Mahomes s where Patrick runs for 300 plus every year? I think that you could potentially have that with him and maybe a couple of touchdowns on the ground.
Yeah,
Um, but he's somebody that, like, once again, what I take, he is going kind of around like Brock Purdy range though, and like I don't mind Caleb Williams. Would I take Caleb Williams over Jared Goff? And I keep kind of, doing this, but like Jared Goff, people that I just don't think can be this 18 plus, 20 plus fantasy points per game. Not, no, I'd rather take Caleb Williams personally. So I don't mind him, but I would rather take Jayden Daniels personally. Like I'd rather just take him.
what's the upside with with Caleb Williams, right? Like I go through that's obviously we talk about process here, but I think about what's the upside for Caleb Williams. The best case scenario is that he's CJ Stroud from last year. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of to me like best case scenario, but he doesn't play in a dome. He plays in Chicago outdoors. And like we talked about with the Bears, they just, for whatever reason, that 4,000 marker is sticky. Like there's no passers. It's just the Windy City for a reason. And, I think the offensive weapons around him, the DeAndre Swifts, the Keenan Allens, DJ Moore, obviously, you go and you get Gerald Everett, like the Romo Dunes, you draft him in the
Yeah.
first round. So you get all the weapons, but there's a reason that I look at Vegas totals. There's a reason that smart fantasy players know to do that. And when you see on Underdog, the passing total is 3,600 yards. And then I look at FanDuel Sportsbook, the passing total is 3,300 yards. That lets me
Dang, I didn't know
know,
that.
yeah,
That's
that
really
lets me
low.
know I'm like, the community is
Yeah.
just a little too high on this guy right now. So I don't always use those as baselines because I think that they hedge a lot
No,
of what
it's
they do,
yeah,
but
it's
it's
a
smart
good
to look at and
yeah.
to know that neither of them has them over 3,700 yards is a very clear indicator that we're on the right track with that.
Well, and you mentioned CJ Stroud, like, CJ Stroud wasn't being drafted. Like, with Caleb,
Yeah,
you kinda gotta pay typically, it's, like, rounds 8 and 9 in redraft where I'm seeing him go, like, 9th round, and that's just it's not an expensive price tag, like, super expensive, but it is kinda pricey for, like, the guys that he's going around, so,
yes,
I don't mind Caleb, honestly. If he falls out of that range, I'd be more on board, but once again, like, I'd rather just take Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Jayden,
Kirk.
Daniels, like, and you could wait on the last round for Kirk, and there's some good like, 8th round, there's some pretty good players. I mean, you could land Zach Moss. Zach Moss could be the RB1 in Cincy, and that's a really good piece to have. So, like, there's good guys that go around him that I just find myself taking a little bit more th and once again, I just wait on the quarterback position if I miss out on elite guys. So, I don't
Yeah,
hate Caleb, but he's a little pricey for my
yeah.
likings.
I just feel like best case scenario doesn't match what potentially could be worst case scenario that a lot of people aren't
Yeah.
incorporating with him because of the talent around him. So like I said, I hope Caleb succeeds. I want all players to succeed, but
Yeah.
I think when I'm just factoring in some of the other players around him, I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't really see the need to take a Caleb Williams. I'll let somebody else do that.
Yeah. What about so let's switch gears for a second and talk about like super flex. Who's a guy that goes pretty late? Like I'm trying to think, maybe outside the top 20-ish. So maybe
Mhm.
that's kind of like Aaron Rodgers, maybe range, like maybe even a little bit later as a quarterback 3 that you have interest in a super flex league.
I actually the kind of player that I am, I actually got a few guys in that range that I'm like, man, I'd be okay if I had to start them as my QB2 in super flex. When I talk about a guy like Will Levis, I'm just like the weapons around him. I think this Titans offense, I was on this last year with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers too, and Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. When you have the pieces around the players, sometimes that elevates what we're expecting out of the quarterback. And if we got Calvin Ridley up there, we got DeAndre Hopkins, we got Tony Pollard, everybody's expecting a lot from Tajay Spears. Why wouldn't Will Levis be able to move the football downfield and be in the QB2 range? And we didn't see it last year, but he does have a little bit of mobility as well. So if we got any ounce of that, it would elevate his stock. And the other quarterback I really like in this range, you talked about Arthur Smith being a pest, but Russell Wilson.
He goes really late.
Why is he's in the mid-tier QB3 combo and he's been consistently in his
Sometimes at the
career, he's
bottom.
top 15.
Like, in best ball drafts, he goes to, like, the last round of drafts. He's, like,
It's that's
QB
crazy.
32.
That's crazy.
I think
Crazy.
some people are so are you not concerned about Justin Fields? Like, are you I personally think that as long as the Steelers are a competitive team, which I anticipate they will be, like, I feel like it's gonna be Russell Wilson. Like, I
Yeah,
just think he's the better fit for what they wanna do. I think he's just a better player. I don't the only way I think we see Justin Fields is if, like, obviously he gets hurt or if the Steelers suck, which they just
I don't
don't.
see that. Yeah.
They're never that team, so
I don't think Russ would have went to the Steelers as quickly as he did if he wasn't guaranteed the starting gig. Like that's
yeah.
kind of how I figured that. And Russ has
For as
when
cheap
has
as he
Russ
did,
really like yeah,
signed
as
for a
cheap as he
million.
when has he played bad? Like
Yeah,
obviously we've seen him play a little bit out of whack with Denver for a while, but he even righted that ship. So
yeah,
when have we just seen Russ just be a non-viable fantasy quarterback? He's always kind of been a viable guy for us to start. He's just chilling for us as a QB3 right now. So in super flex leagues, especially, like I think if you can get an anchor quarterback that you like, somebody in the top 12 range, you can wait until the QB3 range and get, on a weekly production. I'm not saying they're going to finish this way, but on a weekly production, a Geno Smith, a Baker Mayfield, a Matt Stafford, a Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins. We can find those players later in the QB3 range. And like I said, maybe it's not as consistent, but like Derek Carr, I don't like Derek Carr at all, but every year he's a QB
yeah,
17, QB 16, QB
yeah,
18. Every single year we know what to expect. He's like QB 28 right now. So I just think the QB position is loaded right now.
Well, and here's an interesting stat, right? I mean, I would say, who would you rather have, Jared Goff or Russell Wilson? I feel like
Goff.
90% of people would say Goff. Last year, Jared Goff was quarterback 11 in points per game, 17.8. Last year, Russell Wilson was quarterback 12 at 17.7 fantasy points
I
per
like
game.
Russ.
So I agree with you, and I mean, I could argue you could argue that he's probably maybe walking into a better situation too in Pittsburgh,
Yeah,
especially if they had Deontay. I mean,
it is.
I
It
would
is.
like I think George is better than anybody they had last year. You have Pat Fryermuth, who I think has been a bit underrated just because of the horrendous quarterback play they've
Yeah,
had
and
there. I think
injuries too. He's got to stay healthy.
he's been a bit banged up. Though line looks good, but no, I agree. I think Russell Wilson is just in best ball too. I think you go an elite quarterback early, and then you just wait on your quarterback too, and just have it be Russell Wilson who can put up decent spike weeks here and there. Then
Yeah,
that's all you kind of need. One guy that I do like, and this is risky. I won't lie, but I really like him as a prospect, and that's Drake May. Now I hate this offense, but he's a
interesting.
guy that goes super late. Like he's constantly going outside the top 25. But he's a guy that like was the third overall draft pick. We see some rookie quarterbacks do well year in and year out, and he's a guy that I just don't think there's any expectations for him. It's not a doesn't project to be a very good offense, but Drake May's got a cannon and he's athletic. So he's a guy that I think can have really a lot of people compare him, analysts comparing him to Josh Allen. Now, do I
Yep.
think he's going to be Josh Allen? No. But do I think that he could push for, 400 rushing yards? Possibly. Have a couple of rushing touchdowns? Sure. And what if he gets to, 18 passing touchdowns? Is it going to be great? No. But I think that he's just a guy who could significantly outperform his ADP if he ends up being a pretty good NFL player, just because we've seen this archetype where he does have pocket passing tools, but he's also a guy who can get out of structure and is very good out of structure. Now, will it translate to the NFL? I don't know. But for me, I do really like Russ in that range. But if there's another guy that I like taking a shot on, it's Drake May over, JJ McCarthy and like Bo Nix, just because of that athleticism that he possesses. So he's intriguing for me that I just want to take a shot on.
If I was going to take a rookie in that range, it would be Drake May. It would be, but I have major concerns about him this season. Like I just
Yeah,
think,
yeah,
hey, like you get the Josh Allen archetype. It took Josh Allen a while to get things
yeah.
going, and he was a little bit raw. And the weapons around them in New England aren't the best. You're talking about a bunch of journeyman receivers.
Like
The
the
run game
worst.
is mid, and new coach. Like there's just a lot of things to juggle there as far as like new things being thrown at a rookie quarterback. And that's not even the worst problem. The worst problem is that he's probably not even going to be the starter for a majority of the season. I think they're going to give the keys to Jacoby Brissett, bring him on later in the season. So this would be a guy like you'd have to have a deep bench. You'd have to have cojones of steel to hold on to him. But I think in the
I
second
think
half
he'll
of the
play
year,
early,
he'll
personally.
play. Do you think he'll play
I just
early?
yeah, I think that I don't think Jacoby Brissett is. I well, I could be
He's
wrong.
been solid.
I think Drake May has potential to be special. I really think Drake May has the potential to be the best quarterback in this draft class. Like that's how highly I think of
Wow.
him. So, no, but I agree with you. The weapons are good around him, but now not every
The best in
situation
this
is
draft
like
over
that.
Caleb and over Jayden Daniels?
Oh, I think Washington made a mistake personally going Jayden Daniels. Like one blow up year has done nothing. Like there was real talk of Drake May after his sophomore season. He had a bit of a down year his junior season. So did Caleb, right? But there was talks that like this was the unanimous number 2 and could potentially push Caleb because of how good he was his sophomore season. Last year had nobody in that offense. You had Tez Walker, but Tez Walker ended up being like a day 3 pick in the 5th round. So like there's just nobody there for Drake May last year. So I think Caleb's the safest prospect in the draft class and arguably the highest ceiling, but I do think that there's a chance. Drake May is just basically Caleb Williams. He has all the athleticism, all the tools, powerful arm, everything that you want in the quarterback to hit. Once again, does he hit? I don't know. Quarterback is so incredibly difficult to project. I
Yeah.
mean, And NFL GMs lose their jobs all the time because they can't hit on the quarterback position. So no, I do agree with you though. The weapons are awful, but we also thought the weapons were awful for CJ Stroud, and not saying this is the
That's
same
true.
thing.
That's
Not
true.
I hate to compare it, but good players elevate those players around him. And if he's a good player, he can elevate some of those players. Because I do think the two rookies are interesting there in New England, like Polk and Javon Baker. I think are intriguing. Will they
Oh
actually be
gosh.
good? I don't know
Oh
either, but
gosh.
yeah.
Oh gosh. Don't get me started on
Let's
the New
go
England.
Drake May.
We'll save the New England receiver combo for another day because I don't understand that hype at all. At all.
I don't like those guys. Don't get me
Baker or
wrong.
Polk, but the community does. And I to
I
this
don't
day
mind
still
Baker
don't
for
understand it.
I do draft a lot of Baker for best ball because he goes in the last round. And
Yeah.
you know, I could go with Odell. Sometimes I do take Odell because I think Odell's a
Odell, yeah.
little intriguing there in
Yeah, especially if
Miami.
there's an injury. Especially if
Yes,
there's an injury.
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I mean that's good. Any other thoughts here? Another one player
I
you
how
want
do
to talk
you
about
let me
quickly?
ask you this because obviously we talked about like the players. How do you address super flex? Right? Because I run into this a lot in my drafts that I do, my mock drafts. And we got to get on a mock draft because I think it would be good for you to come into my community and draft with my guys and kind of give them your feedback and vice versa. Like
Yeah.
I come in and give my feedback. But a lot of people in super flex leagues think first round, no matter what, you have to take a quarterback. And in the first couple rounds, you need to secure both of your quarterbacks. Now, in a 12-team Superflex league, that means there's 24 guys gone, probably within the first 5 rounds. In your typical league, how do you address the quarterback position? Because I've been known to wait more than a few rounds to grab a couple quarterbacks.
So I've done a couple this year. If I was early in the draft order, I probably would go quarterback in the first round just because there's some elite guys that I really like and can be the best quarterbacks. But it's usually once like because I really do like Kyler,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like the back half of the second round where I just did a draft on this the other day. But I went my first 2 rounds, no quarterback, and I ended up with like Jamar Chase, Bijan Robinson. And then I was able to land Jayden Daniels and Trevor Lawrence as my two quarterbacks
Yeah.
in the
See.
third and fourth. And like I was sitting there. I love that team. Like I
Yeah.
love that start, but it's also a little bit risky to wait because you don't know. Like unless you know your team, your league and how they draft, you could have a chance where I've seen it before. Like 70% of those teams are drafting two quarterbacks in the first 2 rounds, and you could have a lot of quarterbacks already off the board. But Trevor Lawrence is sitting there at quarterback 15, so there's a good chance you could land him as your quarterback one, and I'd be okay with that. But who's your quarterback two? So it just kind of depends on like how the draft is falling, but I don't mind waiting, especially if I draft an elite quarterback, like I'll wait on my quarterback too. But later in the first, I think it's a good idea to kind of pivot and just pick up, those elite skill position guys and then kind of attack the quarterback position like, 3, maybe and wait till 5 for your second quarterback. But I would go my second quarterback a little bit earlier just because the guy that you could have you're already kind of at a disadvantage at the quarterback position a little bit depending on who it is. So that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah, I'm fully like I would rather have a top heavy positional lineup because of what we talked about. I think there's so much depth, especially this year at the quarterback position, and I think everybody drafts quarterbacks because they're such a lock for production, like they don't get hurt. And their production, we know we can rely on it. They're the highest scorers in fantasy, right? But we look at even like last season and the guys who drafted Anthony Richardson, the guys who drafted Patrick Mahomes, even Joe Burrow, Trevor
Yeah.
Lawrence was going high. I can go through a bunch of names, and even in your sneaky players, you wanted to draft Geno Smith a little bit higher last year. Like there was a lot of players who didn't live up to expectation at the quarterback position, and for all the talent that's in the league right now, I just don't see a reason why to reach. Like unless
Yeah.
you can get really good value on them, why not make the rest of your starting lineup impactful, especially if you're in a 3 receiver league and you have another
Yeah.
regular flex position. Now, if you're in a 2 receiver league, I get it. Like that's when the quarterback
Mhm.
should be a little bit more valuable, or maybe you don't have a flex in your league. That's when you should value the quarterback a little bit more. But in super flex leagues, especially with 3 wide receivers, it's like you can rely. You don't have to have 2 elite guys at quarterback. You
Yeah.
can have 2 middle of the tier guys with upside and be very, very fine off. Like
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
No, I agree. I agree. I think that there's certain points where the quarterback position, it's just best to go with weight. Like I always say this, draft in tiers, just because when you
Yes.
know certain tiers, you know where you can get a guy a little bit later that's really not different than the guy you're going to take on the board, right? So, how once again, like talking about the draft that I just did, I love Trevor Lawrence, I love Jayden Daniels, so I went those two guys right because the next guy was like not even Jared Goff, it was like Kirk Cousins, and I like those guys a lot more than Kirk Cousins, so I just snagged those two guys right away, and I feel like I could have 2 top 10 quarterbacks on top
Yeah.
of, some elite guys at the other positions. So that's I agree with you. Just
To give you
it's
kind of an
important to know.
example, right? Like in the draft I was in, I did a super flex draft, mock draft, right? Josh Allen went, Mahomes went, Jalen Hurts went, right? Lamar went. I was picked 12. And I
Mhm.
think my community obviously has been listening to me and knows to wait on quarterback. But I went Brees Hall. Then I came back around in the second round, got AJ Brown. I had Cooper Kupp in the third round, Debo Samuel in the fourth. And it was like because I was taking those positional players, it actually affected a lot of the other teams. They
Mhm.
stopped drafting quarterbacks, right? Because they're like, oh shit, this guy has so many top tier talent. Like, I got to get some positional players. The guys who took two quarterbacks early were kind of reeling later in the draft.
Yeah.
And then when I came back around to the fifth and sixth round, it was like everybody was taking positional players. Dak fell to me and Kyler Murray fell to me. And I'm like, oh,
What?
like, yes, that's what I'm
That's
saying because it was
crazy.
reactionary because I decided I wasn't going to take quarterback and a couple other teams did. Now that talent started to fall. And to be honest with you, I probably could have waited even longer because then guys like Russell Wilson, Gino, they were going way later too. So I think it depends on your draft, but a strategy for those, especially in the ones where they're like, everybody's taking a quarterback is to kind of be the difference, like the
Yeah.
outlier. Be the guy that's taking all positional players. It might throw the rest of your draft off.
Well, yeah, and it's
Watch,
also
let's do
kind
a
of
draft.
like
Let's do a super flex draft soon. Watch, I'll show you. I'll show you what it looks like.
no,
Like
for sure.
it throws people
And
up.
what you do too is like you pivot. It's like it's kind of like what's happening with best ball. Now, best ball is a little bit different because you have 3 wide receivers you're starting, but like the running back position is getting pushed so far down the board that like at certain times it's best to just pivot because you're getting a guy who can be the RB1, but you're gonna or draft a wide receiver who really you're looking at, wide receiver 2-ish,
Chris
hopefully.
Olave.
Yeah, but even not even him, like
Yeah.
you're in best ball and underdog right now. You have to take like once the 6th round comes around, you get like Rashad White there, Joe Mixon goes there, or you're stuck drafting like JSN and Keon Coleman. So like it's crazy how
Yeah.
far the position has gone pushed up. And it's kind of like super flex where there's times when those quarterbacks go super early. And the best thing is just to pivot and fade what the other league mates are doing and just take those elite skill position players that are now being pushed down the board because people are overvaluing the quarterback position a little bit too much. So
100%.
and it's different than like in Dynasty, I would definitely go quarterbacks, like Dynasty Superflex. That's a whole different beast. But like
Yeah.
redraft, you can also there's going to be guys throughout the season, injuries happen that you can pick them up and maybe even play them the full season because that's just it happens every single year. We see it every single year. So but yeah, I would try to at least have one good guy. But like the fact that you got Kyler, because I want to pull this up. I just did one
Yeah.
yesterday. I'm gonna tell you where Kyler went in this one. That so in this super flex draft, usually I try to do one per day now. But where did Kyler go? Kyler went at the 111 in this draft. Dak
Oh
went at the
wow.
206. So yeah, like once I was on the board, I had Jayden Daniels, Trevor Lawrence. Caleb Williams did go right after me, and then Jared Goff. So I got Trevor Lawrence in the 4th round. Goff was at 401. I got Trevor Lawrence at the 403. But the best available quarterbacks on the board at that time were like um Tua Tagovailoa, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. So it's like it depends on how your draft is going and you gotta react to how the draft is going and super flex. But yeah, like
Right.
you can wait a little bit on the quarterback position, especially when you're later in the draft order. I think that's when
Yeah.
it's the best to maybe skip the first 2 rounds and then go quarterback, maybe depending on how the draft falls. But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, and every league is different too. So just because you
Yeah.
do mock drafts and just because
Yeah,
quarterbacks go early, it can be a whole different draft when you get in there. Just know that.
exactly. All right. Well then, yeah, we do got to do some mocks because what you I don't know if you've kind of realized this, but, like, when you talk with your community, they kind of, like, draft like you a little bit too.
Yes,
So it's
yes.
like you're getting, like, a bunch of U's in the draft. So
Bro, it's
it's
hard.
nice
Sometimes
when
it's hard to draft
it
too. I'm
is,
like,
because
bro.
they take some of your guys too that you really like to go at certain ranges, and then it's like a run on your favorite guys, and you're like, "Ugh,
Yep.
now I gotta take one of these guys I don't really like." So, yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be a good one to kind of get, like
Let's do that. Let's schedule
yeah,
that.
we should do
Schedule
that
that
for
for
sure.
sure.
Alright, well, anything else, or you good?
Nah, man, quarterback, it's a position that I think it's valuable, right? But obviously, even we kind of hinted at it. There's going to be a lot of positional battles here. Sometimes quarterbacks go out throughout the middle of the season, so don't like if don't hinge all of your stuff on what you hear. Like what you hear, you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do this with quarterback. Play your draft, and I think that's the strategy for almost every position. At least for me, I think quarterback is like, who do you feel comfortable with? Do you feel like you'd be upset if you missed on Jayden Daniels? Would you be upset? Then take a earlier
Yeah,
quarterback. And
yeah.
if you feel like, hey, I want to take the risk with a player like that, now you're a little bit more like, okay, I can take players in the middle QB2 conversation and feel fine. Trust yourself and know yourself.
And last thing I'll say kinda too is, like, some people do this, and it's usually kinda novice, people playing, but, like, they feel like they gotta build out the roster completely, and then they can start to draft bench players, like, just don't feel like in the 8th round that you gotta take a quarterback just because, you drafted all the other positions. Like, there's plenty of guys that get later in the draft that can be, the what, 10th quarterback overall, kinda where you're drafting those guys. So you can wait on the position, and there's other guys to go. But if you want security blankets, you do have to pay premiums for some of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football. But I also think that they're kind of worth it just because they do have that league winning upside. These are guys who can, get 40 plus points in a game and win you a week single handedly. So, yeah, that's kind of how I approach it. But always get your guy, and you can wait a little bit. So,
T Law will be a top 5 quarterback this season.
yo, that's pretty crazy. I love it though. I love T Law for where he's going. Tremendous value. Tremendous value. All right. So with that being said, appreciate you all. Make sure you hit that follow button, and we'll see you all next time. Peace out, people.